Welcome to the Urban Capital Podcast, intelligent conversations with Marceline, London, Midlands, North. I'll start off by welcoming you back, Ryan, and thanking you for joining me again.
And the pleasure's all mine. Thank you very much for inviting me back.
Thank you. I want to start off by saying that the last podcast that you did with me, we had absolutely brilliant response. I mean, in less than a week, we had 1.8k views. So I'm really, yes.
I'm famous.
Nearly.
That was great. That was time. We had a great time.
We did. And I think people have been sharing it, and I've been getting really positive messages that, you know, they just felt that they were able to at least get some information that was trustworthy, that they could check out. You know, people that did have some questions, you answered quite a few things. So, and of course, you're always a pleasure to listen to as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome. So tonight I'm going to scare you now. Look, I've got a whole list of questions.
Oh my goodness me! And I'm not even warned. I've not been pre-warned. Oh my goodness.
And that is true. You've not been pre-warned.
Hey, what can I? It's a difficult question. Can I go 50-50?
You can't do a phone a friend. You are the friend.
Oh, great.
No, they're not too taxing. Today I woke up early, and as the SWAT I am, I was straight on to looking at. Well, actually, I'm going to start at the beginning. You know, last night I saw various videos in response to Boris Johnson's announcement.
Oh, right, yes.
And I think it was the first time I've ever put on a news programme for comedic value.
You know I have.
But all jokes aside, I think one thing we can agree on is that we've all, you know, for weeks we've all been frustrated, and last night left us all confused.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you questions like, what does all that mean? But
I'm totally confused. And it's worrying because, you know, in my profession, I'm used to having complex facts and applying complex law to those facts and get it. I didn't see the speech live. I had a few texts people and said it wasn't the best performance. And then and of course, well, we know what's happened afterwards. You know, lots of people just being confused, and the minister just tried to do their best to clarify matters, and I think it's just led to more confusion. Yeah, that's worrying.
I watched Len McCluskey this morning. The guy, I think he's the Secretary General or something for Union.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was talking about, that's actually what these are really, it's my notes, they're not really lots of questions.
I can breathe.
But he was talking about workers having rights certainly under health and safety law, if they're being told go to work, don't go to work. So those that choose to go to work, or perhaps are told they have to go back, Len McCluskey was saying that there needs to be very clear I guess a COVID-19 strategy within workplaces that, you know, takes into account the health and safety aspect of this.
Yeah.
Now, what I thought was interesting was that he was saying it was very confusing, and that people would have the right to walk out, or their advice is to walk out if you don't feel that the standard of health and safety is conducive to you being back at work and being safe. Yeah. But that's then going to very much rely on a personal, individual judgment, isn't it? And even levels of anxiety, etc. Yeah. For you, in employment law, that must sound like a bit of a minefield.
It is, yeah, because obviously an employer owes a duty to its employee, you know, health and safety and so on and so forth. Now, I think, and obviously it hasn't been tested yet with COVID-19. I think if someone feels uncomfortable coming back to work, and let's just say that the basis of their feelings is based on government guidance, and we know that in itself is somewhat confusing. and the employer interprets what the government said in one way, the employer interprets it another way, and the employer says, well, you've got to now come into work. The employee says, no, I'm concerned, or I might not be able to. If you're coming to work, I'm not confident that I can keep the 2 meter distance from a fellow employee. Then there will be difficulties there. It hasn't been tested, but what does the employer do? Well, in every case anyway, the employer has to act reasonably. And the term that we use is act reasonably within the bands of reasonable responses. So what would be the reasonable response by the employer when an employee has, on the face of it, legitimate concerns? What can you do? I mean, the alternative is an employer can discipline the employee, but that's very risky. That might not be a reasonable response. And I would say to employers, that's really not in this day and age. I mean, you really have to listen carefully to what employees are saying, because there's a genuine threat out there. You know, the initial news that we got many months ago that it was only certain people who were vulnerable due to heart conditions and over 70s. Well, we know that's not the case now. You know, you've seen people in their 20s are dying, and so on. So I wouldn't advise employers to take that drastic action or subjecting anyone to disciplinary measures because they have legitimate concerns about their health. Advise employers against taking such actions.
And one of the other things that was referred to by the union boss was that that although Dominic Raab has said that he's going to be, in response to people being confused, and that being the general response, certainly across social media and things like that. So with that being the case, Dominic Raab's response was that he's going to put out this 50-page guidance.
Yes.
Now, the word guidance is causing the union panic as well, because they're saying, well, guidance, that means that employers don't have to comply with everything that's in there. It is a guide that you can choose to follow or not choose to follow. Yes. I mean, it makes you wonder why it needs to be 50 pages long.
Yes.
But, you know, again, so that's something there, isn't it, as well, in terms of this guidance and employers, I suppose, seeking the right type of advice or getting the right type of information before everyone floods back into the workplace. Would you agree?
Yeah, I do. It does. It can cause confusion. And, you know, there are many statutes that are accompanied by guidance. And it is the law that matters. It's not the guidance. The guidance is helpful. If an employer were to act in a particular way, or rather act in accordance with a guidance, and the employee took some action against the employer can say, well, we follow this guidance, but you have to, it's the employer that's liable, not the guidance. You know, for example, a clear example is the HMRC site, where you type in whether or not you're deemed to be self-employed for paying tax, whatever it is, to the HMRC. But of course, who determines whether or not you are an employee? It's the Employment Tribunal. It's not HMRC. And it can be, and there have been times, a discrepancy between the two, where someone types in the information, the HMRC site says they're self-employed. They go to the Employment Tribunal, and the Employment Tribunal says, no, actually, you're not self-employed, you're deemed to be an employee. So what you've got to do, you've got to go to the primary source, i.e. the law itself. And so the guidance helps, but you can't rely solely on that. You do have to go to the law and see, you know, if you are complying with the law rather than just the guidance. Because the guidance is just an interpretation of the law. And that interpretation may not be correct. And we've seen there have been discrepancies, even within the guidance itself. It's the law that, it's a minefield. This new thing has really caused a lot of problems because the law is gradual. we know in advance that a law is going to change, so we know that could be years before, it could be months before, that on April the 6th, the law is going to do this. The law is going to say this is going to happen. It's happening so fast. So, and we've had the law guidance coming out, and then 2 days later, that's been refined because questions have been asked, and then it's been refined again and again and again. And what we've had in this case is it's been, with regards to COVID and the job retention scheme, we had public policy announcement with no concrete law. So when it was announced, a job retention scheme by the Chancellor, there was no document you can go to and read the law. But you had guidance on something where there was no law to check it against.
Yeah.
So what came afterwards, after the guidance, and that's, very, 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 well, instead of law, the written document came after the guidance itself, which is most unusual.
So this is a difficult question for you to answer before I even ask it, but it's probably more of a, I don't know, educated guess that I'm asking you for.
Okay.
I mean, you've just hit on something there with how rapidly things are changing and being brought in, into play, even before, it sounds like, even before they've been ironed out completely behind the doors of government. Do you envisage that this might result in changes to employment law?
I think it will result more in changes in employment practice rather than necessarily employment law. The law remains anyway, and I think it will encourage people or employers to just view how they, their working practice, how they move forward. We touched on this last time. But I think bringing the word furlough into our lexicon, as it were, because it's not something we use before as such, I think that employers will look to see how that can work better for them in the future. I think something that may cause a problem maybe is that the people who have been furloughed has obviously agreed, well, I say obviously, I presume most of them have agreed to a variation to their contract of employment. And the figure, the percentage that's branded around for obvious reasons, 80%. Excuse me. But I think what's going to happen is that some people may not realize that they have agreed to a permanent drop to 80% of their salary. So there is a variation of the contract, but because we've got no definite end date, we don't know when it's going to come to an end. Yeah. Some people, I think has happened is that they've agreed to a reduction of 80% of their current salary, but there's no clause in there saying when it's going to come to an end. So if they're called back into work, what they will find is that their salary is being dropped to 80%, and that is the new salary. Forget the 80%. The 80% becomes 100%. So I think that's going to happen. I think there might be some issues as well, maybe with the law, is that.
Can I ask a question there?
Oh, yeah.
But if being furloughed, I thought meant technical redundancy, we can't employ you right now for reasons out of our control. Here's 80% of your salary, stay at home. I would have presumed, being a layman, that if you then return to work, that naturally is your furlough come to an end, because now you're able to return to work. And so there's some, you're back in a...
Right, yeah, good question. Right. Let me explain. You could always furlough someone anyway. Right. And the confusion that's happened here is that the word furlough was used in conjunction with the job retention scheme. So when the job retention scheme comes to an end, and it will come to an end, I mean, the prediction is now at the end of June, some people can still be furloughed. So all that's happened, you're absent with leave, effectively. That's all that means. So when you come back, and just put aside the COVID thing, you could be working in a factory in a particular place where some orders are dropped, but the employer knows a big order's coming in a month's time. They have no work for you, so you're furloughed for a month. So it's not linked to COVID, it's not linked to coronavirus, it's not even linked to a job retention scheme. The furlough can exist without the job retention scheme. The job retention scheme, as it is, cannot exist without furlough. So when you come, all you have done for that to happen, you must have agreed, negotiated with your employer to have your contract varied. If you don't do that, and your employer just pays you 80%, you can take your employer to the employment tribunal for unlawful deduction of wages. So that's why you must agree with the two parties must agree that the salary is now going to be 80%, or it may be less, of what it is currently is. So the person is then off work, they're not working for the employer. The problem is that you have to, as an employee, have to say that in the event that something changes, i.e., in the event that the employee is no longer furloughed, my salary will jump back to whatever it is. The problem is that when people just hear this 80%, because that's what the employer can, the grant the employer can get from the government, they may have just negotiated, my salary goes down to 80% during a period or something, but there's no getting back. It's gone down to 80% and you are furloughed. Well, when you're not furloughed, your salary is still 80%, unless you have something that says that when you're no longer furloughed, your salary jumped back. Now, it can happen. The employer can't do it because the employer, like you and I discussed last time, if the job retention scheme comes to an end on a Sunday night, the employer will not necessarily be ready, up and running for business on the Monday. So it might be, it continues. Person work.
But going by what you've just said then, shouldn't the government, or at least the employers, been given that information to ensure that anyone that was signing an agreement to go on furlough was aware of what they were actually signing? Because I don't think, unless somebody would have explained that to me if I was an employee, I wouldn't have thought to ask, well, does this end? I made the presumption, and I probably would have if I was an employee, that, okay, this is just for the time being until the day I return to, return to work.
Actually, yeah, once again, I think this is where there's a little bit of confusion, because what we have to do is go back to basics. An employee is employed by the employer, and there's a contract of employment. The contract is not with the government. So it's the employer that furloughs the employee. There are workers, but let's just stick with employee for now. Now, all the government does not furlough the employee. All the government is doing is saying to the employer, if you furlough this person, which you still have to pay the person's wages, whether we are the government or not, whether we're there or not, we are going to give you 80% of that person's wages, up to a maximum of £2,500. So any negotiation between the employer and the employee, that's a matter for them. That has nothing to do with the government. The government is solely dealing with the employer. So the government can't step in and do anything. They're not a party to the contract. So people are thinking, because they're using furlough and job retention scheme almost as one, that the government somehow plays a role in this. The only role they play is giving the employer 80% of the wages. Nothing more, nothing else.
Yeah. It's just worrying whether people, not the fact that the government can't step in if something goes wrong, but just the fact, I would be interested to know how many people were aware that you can return to work and still be furloughed, because, as you said, because it's not a term that we're familiar with, and I've only become familiar with because of this unusual situation of lockdown, that most people, I wonder if most people looked into that, looked into the detail, or whether that's something that people are going to start becoming aware of now.
Yeah, they will do. I think employers will do as well, because what employers will do, that they'll have a clause that will enable them to temporarily lay off staff. Some employers have it anyway. I've drafted them myself. I mean, once again, the furlough argument is not new to employment lawyers. You just don't use the word furlough, temporary layoff. So you have some contracts of employment will say that in the event of something happening, the employer can temporarily lay off the member of staff, which they probably, some would have done in this case anyway. But of course, when the government is giving 80% of the wage, then, you know, the employer naturally would tap into that. So they could have done it anyway.
So overall, what is your advice for employees right now? Just to summarise, in terms of those that either feel they have no choice but to go back to work, those that have been, you know, chomping at the bit to go back to work, fed up of being in the house. What's your overall advice to them in terms of what to be aware of? And I'm thinking in relation to things like what Len McCluskey referred to earlier, what their rights are within the workplace, health and safety, what to do if they're concerned and want to leave the workplace, just that kind of.
I would suggest that, look, if you have what you believe to be are legitimate concerns, do raise them with your employer, and I would suggest you put them in writing. You know, if you feel that it's not safe for you to come back to work, do put it in writing, because the employer has to consider it. And if the employer may agree. If the employer disagrees, then, you know, the employer will have to put that in writing. And then, of course, is what happens next. The employee can put in a grievance, for example, if they feel that hasn't been the outcome is not to their satisfaction. The employer has the right, and I say I would advise against this, to discipline someone if they feel the person at least raise legitimate concerns, even though the employer may not necessarily agree with the way to do it. But I think what will happen, you know, we're going to try and strike a balance here. I think employers will have to look at a different way of practicing. Obviously, it's easier. Well, I can't say it's easier. Maybe easier for people who are more office-based to say, well, look, you can keep 2 meters distance. Of course, if you work in a factory in some way, you probably can't do that.
Yeah.
You have to probably work closer to someone, depending on what job you do. So I think that's one thing. The next thing is that, sadly, some people will lose their jobs. There's no two ways about it. That's going to happen. What I would say that someone who finds himself in that position is to remind themselves that the normal policies still apply. And what I mean by that is it's no different from any other redundancy situation. So it's not a case that one person was being furloughed, another person hadn't been furloughed, and then one person would naturally have been furloughed, been made redundant. There would still have to be a pool, for example. So it could be the person that hadn't been furloughed before, and the person who has been furloughed are still a pool and at risk of redundancy. So the fair procedures, there still must be a fair procedure that one has to apply. So the policies still apply; they're not redundant at all. So that would be my advice.
Thank you. And I'm going to touch on something else, sticking with employment, kind of. Again, I'm not asking you this in terms of Ryan, Barrister, what is the answer to this question? Because I'm sure there isn't one. But, you know, my analytical brain is on overdrive at the moment. So let's touch on the hot topic of BeAME being at higher risk of death if they, people from BeAME communities being at high risk of death if they contract COVID. You know, I wrote an article sharing my opinion on the fact that I don't think COVID racially discriminates. I think that it's actually highlighting racial discrimination and inequalities that, you know, that we knew were there already. And this, unfortunately, is just shone a spotlight on them as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. And then, you know, at the end of the week, when the Office for National Statistics, ONS, does its first health, research based on ethnicity for this reason, Boris Johnson comes out and says, everyone go back to work. There were no special measures in place. It's not been mentioned. I feel actually quite ignored. And I feel that all that noise was for nothing if then you don't even acknowledge that I'm at potentially all this high risk. You're saying, go back to work if you want to. Don't if you don't want to. Do you have an opinion on that?
I suppose I do. It's not a legal opinion. No, it's, you know, I think this is, for some people, it's the beginning of something. For some people, I've heard some people said, well, why commission this report in the first place? We all know what the answer is. You had someone like Trevor Phillips who said, don't jump to conclusions. Let's wait and see. We've heard about this socio-economic conditions that BeAME, although it's a title it's an acronym I don't particularly like, but I'll use it for now. The conditions that a high percentage of in what conditions they live in. I think it's we're going to hear more about this. It's going to be very obviously it's a hot topic, but it's going to lead to some very difficult and tricky and ethical, moral discussions.
I've got some ethical questions already, and they probably do relate to employment law. So again, I'm self-employed, but let's say I wasn't, and I work for a company, and I'm not going to mention anything, but I'm thinking of a one that I worked for not so long ago, and I would imagine they would have been get back in here and make as much money as possible. So I rock up to work and say, I don't feel safe because I'm black. Yeah. I feel at higher risk because I'm black. I want to go home. Yeah. What are my chances of getting away with that?
Well, you see, that's a very good point. That is a good point, and that's one of the things I said. It's to me, this is going to lead to a lot of things because we know that that people with African Caribbean background, African and Asian as well, there's high blood pressure. There's diabetes. Well, we know it's in the wider community, but, more prone to it. So if someone says, and we know that COVID, if you're diabetic, it's something that you've got to be careful with COVID. We've all got to be careful, but, you're vulnerable. And if as a, say, for example, an African Caribbean person is more at risk or whatever, type 2 diabetic, and what risk of diabetes, and you say, well, look, I can't come into work because I'm really fearful of what could happen with COVID. Well, in those situations, one would expect the employer to make some form of reasonable adjustments, whatever it can, they have to do, but it has to be some reasonable adjustment. So I see that's going to happen. But on another field of study, what I see, which is outside law, and this has been a discussion that's been in the States. This kind of discussion is not entirely new. COVID's new, but the entire discussion of how some people of a different ethnicity, how they react to whatever it might be, certain medicines and so on. This kind of question, we know that the way the medicines are produced is one cap fits all. So I have a headache, someone else has a headache, I go and get my Anodin. I don't get an Anodin that's geared to people of my ethnicity. But when you now have a discussion, a very difficult discussion, that some people are going to be affected in a particular way, do we then have to look at medicine that's geared towards those type of people? Or is medicine for the one cap that fits all? But the problem there is, if the one cap that fits all is for 90% of the population and not the 10 or 5%, then that medicine may not be quite right for the 5%. It's right for the 90%, but not quite right. So I can see it's a can of worms. It really, really is. It's
a minefield, isn't it? Because I'm saying, like, you talked about some obvious things there, or things that have been made obvious, like diabetes, etc. Yeah. But then, I mean, I'm proud to say that some of the things that we've been publishing recently, we're starting to see creep into mainstream a bit more, like the argument around vitamin D, which popped up in mainstream today all of a sudden. But anyway, that's a good thing. But we've been writing about this for a few months in terms of the impact that a condition like that has on, Black people, people of colour, whatever terms we want to use. These are not obvious situations, and in fact the individual may not even know that they're affected by it until their immune system needs to kick in and do its job. So that could be a common cold or flu, or in this case COVID-19.
Yeah.
So, something else like sickle cell, which affects the oxygen and, oxygen levels in the blood. Again, somebody with certain types of sickle cell might think that they're fine because ordinarily they get on about their lives, not realizing that as an underlying condition, when you look at, what something like COVID-19, what we understand it does to the body, that, okay, you may be at risk. These are not obvious things that, an employer might say, well, do you have diabetes or do you have all these things that are associated with us? But these other things that are not publicized enough and that people don't know enough about within the community, let alone outside of it, I worry that there's a high risk factor there that, again, is not being addressed. Just before I finish, if we go back to the socio-economic thing that you mentioned, it suggests that there's going to be a large number of Black people that need to get back to work, or people from those communities, from what we've been told about their socio-economic condition.
Yeah.
Well, it's a catch-22. It just feels really messy.
Yeah, no, indeed. I mean, just on the vitamin D front, from what we've just been discussing, and you say sometimes it's not obvious, and sometimes it's not. Someone doesn't. The policymakers have good intentions, but it could have an adverse effect on some sectors of the community, and that's what indirect discrimination is about. It's not. I'm not saying there's discrimination here on that particular point, but indirect discrimination is not something that's targeted. It just happens to have an adverse effect on certain sectors of the community. Take, for example, the vitamin D point you mentioned. The government policy before, as I understood it, was you're allowed to have 1 hour's exercise a day. Now, let's just say, for argument's sake, we know, or we should know, that those with darker skin need to be out in the sun longer because of melanin and so on. Those with lighter skin do not need to be out in the sun as long as to get the vitamin D dosage. Let's just say, for argument's sake, and I don't know the thing on this, but let's just say that those with darker skin need to be out in the sun for 2 hours. We have a policy here that says you need to have 1 hour exercise. Now, it's with good intentions, but it so happens that it has an adverse effect on some people who are not going to have the 2 hour they need to be out in the sunlight to get the vitamin D. For another sector of the society, it's okay. So there's an example. I mean, I don't know if it's I don't know if it's 1 hour. In fact, I'll be expecting someone to say, how long does one have to be out in the sun to get, their daily vitamin D, and so on. So in situations like that, you can see how there are good intentions, I think, have your 1 hour exercise, but it may have an adverse effect.
Yeah, and I get it from that point of view, because I think that's a really good point, and it's a point that brings everything into perspective. Again, like you say, not everything is with the intention of being malicious to one group or another.
Yeah.
But I'm talking in this broader context of everybody get back to work if you want to, if you don't want to. So that's the humorous side, that we're all finding a bit of humour in it. However, at the end of a week where we've just been told that because of things like socioeconomic deprivation, which suggests that some of the key people that are going to want to get back to work are those people potentially most worried about money, we're being told that this BeAME communities fall largely into those brackets. And then we're told at the end of the week, we'll go back to work. But there's no specific kind of advice to say, or do you know what I mean? So if you're somebody at home now, you're Black, Asian, fall into any of these categories, need to get back to work because you don't have the funds to put in everything out there, but you've just entered a week where you've been told that you are at the most risk of potentially contracting or certainly dying of COVID. See where I'm getting?
I do. It's a very good point, because it's the wider social issues there, aren't there? Because, you have a large percentage who are working maybe in the lower paid jobs. And, there's a point we're going to touch on as well, because, it has been for some people a saviour. They get an 80% of their wages. But let's just think about this for a moment. If you're living hand to mouth, and 100% of your wages pays your bills. In fact, 100% is not enough. And 80% you're struggling. So you do have to go back to work to get that 100% when you're already struggling 80% anyway. Because one of the things that is that's happened from this is that there may be a deferment for paying your bills, but you still have to pay the bills.
Exactly.
So you still have to pay it. And when you go back to work, if you're fortunate enough to get 100% of your salary, that's good. But you need 120% of your salary to get back to pay. It's like when you buy that sofa and it's, have it now and pay in 12 months' time. You've got the sofa now, but you've got to pay for it in a month's time. You say, oh my goodness. So you still got to pay the bills. They're going to be, it's all right deferring it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's obviously going to be a difficult thing. And once again, it's wider than just, a job with, this person. It's wider social, economic issues and other things as well that needs really to be addressed. And like I said, I think what we've had with this report's been commissioned for COVID-19, but there's a lot more that's going to come out of this, a lot more. Because what we have to find out is just not what the causes are, but what are we going to do with it? What are we going to do with that data?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think it's thrown up a lot, like you said, a lot of deep layered issues. I probably say this all the time because I think there's so many layers to everything anyway in society and, in any one individual person's experience. But I think specifically, if I'm talking now specifically about the Black community, or if you want to go as broad as Black, Asian and other, other ethnic communities,
yes.
There's a lot of issues thrown up. But with the Black community specifically, again, I mentioned it in the article, there's all kind of economic issues, whether it's about job losses, whether it's about those that might be working in jobs that already weren't the most secure roles. Those that didn't diversify in terms of business, that make up a large percentage, good percentage of those small businesses. There's just so many layers that for me makes me think we can't just be sat here panicking about COVID-19 within our community, that actually it's time we start to be much more mobilized politically and start to think differently in terms of our economics. And do you have an opinion on any of that?
Yeah, I do because you've spoken about the vitamin D deficiency and so on, and I dare say a lot of people are not aware of that. There have to be a time when one has to contribute to the narrative, contribute to the information that we are being fed. And because obviously in the media, they're going to be broadcasting information that naturally they will feel is of interest to the mass. You don't necessarily just going to be producing information that is for the 5 or 10%. But having said that, the 5 or 10% are equally as important as the 90%. And what I think the ethnic minority have to do is to play a part in the narrative, that the information that we are fed, that is, oh my goodness, I've just had my phone that's come on. I must have said Siri or something. Naughty Siri. You do have to, for all sectors, have to contribute in what is information that is important to for ourselves and for anybody else for that matter. Many people don't know about sickle cell, for example. We do, but many people don't. So I must apologise. I can't see. Right, I'm going to switch the thing off. Right. So the only way it's going to happen is if you take and participate and contribute that narrative. It's vitally important. Absolutely.
So even bearing that in mind, where we just touched on, and I'm not, suggesting that people shouldn't go to work because they are from what is called a BeAME community. I just thought it was interesting in that because there is only a guidance that's been put out there, there may be people that have concerns that are not understood in that wider community because it feels quite personal to us at the moment. And fortunately, the discussion is being had in the public arena, but whether or not that's going to make an impact on people's choices of being able to go back to work, And again, I'm thinking of those businesses where they are quite desperate for their staff to be back. They want to survive. They want to get back in. And that just made just sound like one complication too many for them to deal with. So that's why I touched on that. But do you think in that document or in the advice or whatever that there should be some specific protection put in place?
Yeah, I think what's going to happen is that every company should have a set of policies anyway, staff handbook and so on, that deals with all sorts of things, whether it be a disciplinary grievance, health and safety, social media, all these sorts of things. There obviously will be some risk assessment that hadn't been, well, risk assessment's been there for companies, but clearly something like COVID, this is new to us. So I think companies will have to undertake a risk assessment and see, those people who can effectively come back to work and be safe in the environment. Because like I said, it is an implied term that the employer does owe a duty for the well-being and physical and mental well-being of its staff. So if someone's going to contravene that, obviously an employee should not be in the workplace. But I think that the best way an employer is going to deal with that, is to make reasonable adjustments. We're not talking about necessarily disability here, but to make reasonable adjustments for the members of staff who they feel are going to be affected. Or probably more importantly, to some degree, is that the employee feels safe at work. Because of course, if you've got an employee that feels safe at work, they'll be more productive than some sitting there being worried for the whole day. You're not going to get much out of that person. So a good employer, a reasonable employer, I would say, would have to take those kind of things into consideration because we're in new territory. There's two ways about it.
Yeah, absolutely, and you're right. Like you said, it's a tricky one. That's what I was saying at the beginning. It is very much about personal. Even down to levels of anxiety. If one person is kind of taking things a lot more in their stride, and somebody else is actually quite panicky about the whole thing.
Yeah, it is personal. It is personal. However, I wouldn't say that because something's solely personal, it's not legitimate and reasonable for a person to think that way, because it could have two people being faced with exactly the same thing, and they both respond differently. Take, for example, in the case of harassment at work, you can have, let's say, two females. You can have a male person saying something which is quite derogatory. One female, it has no effect on at all. Another female, it does have an effect. It doesn't mean because one person wasn't affected by it that the other person who was affected by it is acting unreasonably or very soft or sensitive or something like that. So we do react differently, and we've got to respect how people react. So yeah, I think we just got to give people respect that they feel this way. They'll raise their concerns. It could be explored by the employer, and hopefully we come to an agreeable middle ground somewhere.
Okay, thank you. And so kind of for me, throwing a final question at you, if we might have touched on it a little bit earlier, but so if I'm an employer, I have found that this has affected my business badly. I need to lay people off.
Yeah.
It's an unfortunate thing.
Yeah.
That must be an absolute nightmare, and a panic area in terms of how do you get that right legally, because so again, anything that you could offer. Like I said earlier on, the normal rules of redundancy apply. So there has to be a good business reason for letting someone go. But what you shouldn't do, you shouldn't be letting people go automatically because they were furloughed, for example. You still have to make the business case for why some people have to be furloughed, and it has to be fair. So you have to have a pool, the right pool of people who are going to be or at risk of redundancy. Like I said, it's not simply enough. Well, the job retention scheme came in as to save people being made redundant. The job retention scheme has gone. Therefore, you're automatically going to be made redundant. That's just not how it works. I can see the logic in the argument, but it's a flawed argument because we know for certain that people who are furloughed weren't necessarily going to be made redundant.
it just so happened the government gave them this scheme. So they said, well, look, rather than keep you employed for 2 months and pay 100% of your salary, the government's going to give us 80%. Well, I might as well furlough you because it saves me money, and so on. So you still have to, employers still have to, undertake a fair process. All the laws apply. The Equality Act applies. So therefore, if 2 people are furloughed and one's disabled and one's not disabled, it's not simply a case of, well, I'll get rid of the disabled person because the other person might be more productive. That's not the way it's going to work. You will find yourself in court and likely to be unsuccessful in a disability discrimination claim. And
in a scenario like that, because a question popped in as you were talking, then popped into my head. In a scenario like that, I presume you can't be turning around to perhaps the person who's got a disability or an underlying condition or something and say, well, it's safer for you to.
Oh, absolutely not. No. Oh, my goodness me, no.
Just checking.
If you've been told that, then come to me. No, you can't do. No, you've got to treat people fairly and you cannot discriminate. Again.
I'm trying to read my light, sorry. Go on, yeah.
You cannot do that. You cannot presume that someone is going to be better off because they have a disability. So therefore, take the cash and run and no, you can't do that. Mm-hmm. That is discrimination. Unlawful discrimination, direct discrimination.
Good.
It's direct. It's not even indirect, it's direct.
I'm just saying, because I want to make sure that people don't try that in reverse. You know what I was referring to earlier about people who potentially are being told that they're at high risk in terms of health, but then there's no specific thing in place for them. Oh, go back to work. They're already confused. Then they get back to work and some kind boss says, well, actually.
Yeah. And that's a very good point. That's a very good point. I'm doing you a favor. So, no, it's really got to, someone can see through that. Someone can see through it. If the employee is saying, I want to come back to work. But I just need these reasonable adjustments to be made, and the adjustments are reasonable. Then it's not for the employer to say, look, I think you'd be better off. Why do you want to come back to work? You've got that dodgy leg. You got this, that, and you can't do that. You cannot do that. No.
And the other thing we talked about before was where employers might want to say, we talked about this in the first podcast, and in this current situation, we could well see that, where employer says, come back to work, and employee says, no, I don't think so. And you've already seen that I can work from home. I want to continue working from home. Are there any obvious rights around that? Or is that, again, a negotiation between employer and employee?
It is between employer and employee. There could be, by law, you can make an application request for flexible working of some kind. So you can do that. You have that right now anyway. And it might be, and I'm almost certain that many people will make that request by saying that, look, I've been off work and bear in mind, when people are talking about being off work here, we're not talking about people being furloughed. We're talking about people working from home. Because when you're furloughed, you're not allowed to work. So it's like people's working from home. And they've said to the employer, well, obviously it's worked, and so on. So I make my request. I'd like to stay at home or come into the office or wherever it is for a few days a week, and so on. Now the employer will have to justify why they would not allow that. And in many cases, they say an employer will think, yeah, it's a good idea. I can save, half of rent of this building that I, was, using to occupy you, do your work. Mm. So you do have the right anyway to make certain requests. Like I said, the law hasn't really changed that much. A lot of things are in existence anyway. You just that employees, obviously there, people are focusing on certain things at the moment, but the laws are there.
Yeah. I think the problem is, and I'm sure you know this better than I do, is that obviously for somebody like you who knows the law, it's, you know that those changes aren't there. But for somebody who, just your ordinary Joe like me who gets up and goes to work and only knows the law if I have to take a case or if I'm sued or something, then I start reading up on, all those subtleties of employment law. Yeah. But otherwise, it's not something that, like in a situation like this, I couldn't imagine as an employee that I would think that I knew anything about what my rights were. Personally, I probably would be reading up on them, but well, I wouldn't, because hopefully I'd be talking to you. You'd tell me.
Of course.
But, so one final thing I'm going to throw at you as well. Now, I've got a podcast interview that I did a few days ago with an international youth ambassador. He's based actually in Italy, but they're doing work that they're trying to promote around the globe around youth unemployment and the impact that the pandemic is thought to going to have on youth unemployment around the world.
Yeah.
So the UN published a report saying there was, they expect an estimated 195 million young people to be unemployed around the world as a result of this. Now, remember, that's global, so
yeah,
it's still a huge number. Now, because of the age and relatively young age of the African population and the huge population of 20 to 30-year-olds, there's also, a big concern that that's going to impact Africa. With countries like this one, with Britain, the concerns are around things like the fact that youth unemployment was already an issue and that young people were finding it more and more difficult since the financial crash to find gainful employment, or certainly long-term employment, secure employment, etc. The amount of them that were on, like 0 hours contracts, all these kind of things, and the impact that this potentially is going to have on the businesses that were employing them. So what they're trying to do is push for countries to get this on the agenda now and to potentially bring in something specific that is either an incentive for employees. I guess it's like positive discrimination. I hate that term, but that kind of thing. So again, it's just an opinion as somebody in the field of law. Is that legal? Is that something that could be done? Are there specific, would that be law or policy? If
it could be done. Positive discrimination, no. But you want equality of opportunity, and that's what I think most people would advocate. Advocate is fair. Some people go further and say you want equal outcomes, but that's a different debate altogether, whether you can actually go for equal outcomes. In other words, same people, someone who's extremely talented at something and someone who's not so talented, you can give the person not so talented the resources to become as talented. That's a totally different debate.
Yeah,
but I think equality of opportunity, definitely. I think what's going to come out from this is that the government took the unprecedented step of having a job retention scheme. No doubt we're going to pay for it somehow, but it's a very good point that I think you've raised there. If the government can find the money for what they've done, and we're grateful for what they've done, because it would have been worse, because we know we're heading for a recession, a very heavy recession, although the predictions are, because this is not a natural economic recession, it's something that's been influenced by something else, that we could recover
quicker.
Yeah, then one where people just suddenly just lost confidence in the economy. Then maybe the government can also invest in schemes where young people can have a foot in the door, or give some money to employees, 80%, for example, of those young people's wages to do something within a firm. And I think that could work. But of course, we want the economy to get back on its feet. Because unemployment is just recession's a horrible thing.
Well, that's it. And the concerning thing, and, I won't give too much away. Hopefully you'll watch the podcast when it goes out this week as well. But, the concerning thing is that we were talking about is, again, coming back to socioeconomic conditions. And, the thought of young people feeling as concerned as they did, for example, when things changed with university fees, or when college grants were taken away, or, all these different things, and the impact that it had on them and their confidence to be out there. And, employment then, has an impact on confidence. So then we start talking about health issues and mental health, and just the knock-on effects are unbearable to think about. So it is in terms of employers and perhaps the law or policies or whatever, it's something that does need to have a focus, doesn't it, really, I suppose?
It does. I mean, I think, like I said, equality of opportunity is central to it. I mean, we know that happens. I mean, even I like my fiction, and some, last time I badly recited of a poem. But, Bernard Shaw's Pygmalion, someone comes in, Professor Eliza, elocution lesson, speaks particular way. Trading Places, it's just a movie, but think what happened there. The dynamics there. You have this person on the street, Eddie Murphy, he's given opportunity to do something, he flourishes. Yeah. You have a person who naturally was given this opportunity, goes on the street and see how they struggle. You can see what happens. Give the person the opportunity, they'll flourish. So that's how, it's not inherent that some people are going to be in a particular way. It's just they have the opportunities. Give them opportunity and they'll do well. That's my belief anyway. So Trading Places is not just a film of entertainment. There's deep message in there. No,
it's true, but that's true of a lot of films, isn't it? If you look for it, usually there is something. Yeah, there's something in there.
Absolutely. Yeah. With a lens, you get a different message from it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Ryan, thank you so much. I'm not going to let you go straight away. I want to know first what music you've been listening to.
My goodness. You know what? It's old school. It was young school in my day. It's old school now. I pretend like I didn't. I'm listening to some Earth, Wind and Fire.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I am out because that was just reminding, taking back in the days. And Shalimar.
Oh, nice. Yeah, okay.
Jackson, I'm really showing my age now, aren't I? Maybe I should be more up to date. Let's say Jay-Z. Yeah, that's what I'm really listening to. No, I play a bit of it now, but I am listening, for some reason, I don't know, I'm listening to some Earth, Wind and Fire, Prince. I know you like your Prince.
Oh, yes.
Prince and MJ and so on. It's just getting me by.
Yeah.
These cases.
And are you back? Are you planning on getting back into the office, or are you going to be seeing how things go?
Yeah, good question. Because I'm up in Leeds pretty soon for a case. I think we're all back to maybe back to normal end of June, July. A lot of my cases have gone into, believe it or not, 2021. So I'm up in Leeds pretty soon, and then I've got a case in North Wales and Manchester and Newcastle.
Gosh.
Yeah, all over the place.
Gosh, what's going on up north?
Just keeping me busy. I don't.
And when I saw the press releases and things that were coming out a few days ago saying that Boris Johnson was going to make this announcement on Sunday, I thought, it's going to take a while before everyone gets used to that and readjust. My inbox is already filling up with people gone back to work. I'm like, oh my gosh, I might catch up. Oh, brilliant. Well, Ryan, thank you so much as always. And we'll definitely do this again. And I know you're going to have something in the magazine, aren't you?
Yes, indeed. I'm going to pen something. Yeah, it's got to be done. You're on my case.
Brilliant.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you very much, and speak to you again soon.
Take care.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.